interests which are outstanding in their country. At this point, we are not at liberty to be any more specific than this. There have been some comments as to why we have picked Guemes Island as a plant site. I think the answer to that is simply that we employed competent engineering personnel to survey the area, and this plant site is the one which they have recommended to us as being the most desirable and most economic for this purpose, and the only site usable for this purpose in Skagit County. The reasons involved are the availability of Bonneville power, which of course is available to all of the people in the aluminum industry at the same terms and rates. The availability of labor, the fact that this is an extremely good protected deep water port and permits low-cost material handling both into and out of the plant, and that there is sufficient land that is reasonably level enough to provide an adequate plant site, high enough above anticipated high water so that there's no problems on that score, but not so high that there are problems of moving material, particularly alumina, from large vessels which will bring it to the plant site, to the storage facilities, and ultimately to the pot rooms themselves. The plant is rated at approximately 130,000 tons per year of aluminum. In various press releases by others, figures have been used ranging from 120 to 140,000 tons. The design capacity is 130,000 tons. Historically, every plant has produced somewhat more than its design capacity. We expect, therefore, that the actual production will be somewhat nearer 140,000 tons, even though we are designing for 130,000 tons. We're going to use the conventional Hall process, the straight electrolytic reduction, in which alumina is dissolved in a bath of fluoride and cryolite and reduced to aluminum with the consumption of carbon electrodes in the process. Essentially, this breaks down into three parts. In the process, of course, a certain relatively small but significant amount of materials used in the electrolytic bath do get into the air in the hoods which are over these pots. Our design is such that the pots will be hooded, and the amount of air, therefore, will be relatively small, as distinct from other approaches to the problem where the vapors and fume get into the air of the pot room in general, and therefore you have to process the air, all the air that's in the entire operating plant. We recycle these materials back into the pots, and there is no effluent. The only other pollution problem we have is the same as any industrial, or for that matter, any community, and that is ordinary sanitary water, sewage problems of that sort. In that area, of course, we propose to follow the standards which are set up by local and state regulations. I believe we are the only company at present, although I must admit I'm sure that as other people's power contracts come up for renewal, they will have an opportunity to do the same as we have already done. I believe, however, we're the only company at present that has committed in our power contract with the Bonneville Power Administration to first submit to them for their review and approval the detailed method of anti-pollution control which we plan to use, and secondly, to covenant to continue to use this, to maintain it, and to use it effectively. If we don't comply with any of these requirements, they have no obligation to supply us power, and without power, our pots freeze up, and I've explained earlier the problem that this means to an aluminum company. In addition, we are negotiating and are getting to the point where we are ready to enter into a contract with Washington State University for monitoring the air, the soil, the vegetable growth, the animal growth in the area for perhaps as much as 18 months, certainly not less than a year before we go into operation, in order to establish a base line from which we can make comparisons, and then continually to monitor from then on. This university, because of the large amount of the aluminum industry which exists here in the Northwest, is without a doubt the best equipped, has done more research and development in this area than any other group of which we have knowledge. And we're fortunate that in being here, being available, and being willing to render this service, we can continually keep a check on the performance of the system which we propose to install, and not run the risk of being a bad neighbor through inadvertence or failure of equipment or any other thing that sometimes does happen in industrial activity. Some comment has also been made as to the size of the plant site, the amount of the area which we propose to use, the effect on the island in general. The plant site we now have is something like a little over 700 acres, I believe 714 acres, of which the facility you see there, which is it's a rendering, it's done to exact scale, uses about 140 acres. The economic size to which this plant might be expanded would probably be twice, perhaps 3 times the capacity, but by the nature of the design, the increments take a very much smaller amount of area than the initial facility. So that we'll use, going in, something less than 20% of our plant site, and we propose to use the balance of the area to provide a landscaped buffering zone with the rest of the island. The plant, because of the natural contours of the ground, will lie in what they refer to, the engineers refer to. Naturally, this breaks down into 2 parts. In the first place, if we don't get a building permit, since we intend to be good citizens wherever we may be, we can't build on the site for which we've made application. We do not have any other alternative sites under option, nor are we negotiating for any. We have every reason to believe that since our application is a normal, routine, reasonable application, that it will be treated fairly and that approval will be given, but we certainly have no assurance from anyone to that effect.
Mr. Meisner, Dwayne Trecker from Channel 12. You're from outside the area. I would like your reaction to the effort by the people who would like to save the San Juan Islands.
Well, as you say, I'm from outside the area. I've visited here, I've studied the maps, and I've seen from the air and, of course, from across the water from driving some of the San Juan Islands. Naturally, since we expect to have 900 people initially, and ultimately we hope to expand and have more people employed here, we want to do everything we can to continue to make the Pacific Northwest as desirable a place in which to live and work as we possibly can. Without trying to be an expert, it seems to me that most of the islands that I've seen from the air are essentially not of any interest from the point of view of industrialization, because they're relatively rugged and they just simply don't offer enough flat land on which to put an industrial activity. Furthermore, they have no utilities at all, and bringing utilities to them would be tremendously expensive. Guemes Island, on the other hand, in Skagit County, not in San Juan County, where most of the San Juan Islands are, is about the same as Manhattan to Jersey City. It's true that it's an island. I guess we're on an island now, for that matter. But it doesn't seem to me to fall into the same category as the other islands. Personally, I like to fish and I like to sail and I like to get out in the woods, and I would certainly do everything I could to preserve the rest of the islands, the San Juan Islands as I regard it. I don't really know how much access the public has to them. In other words, I don't really know for whom they're being preserved, because they are relatively inaccessible, and I understand very largely under private ownership with therefore limited use by the average citizen.
Dr. Meisner, Don Lyle of KBRC in Mount Vernon. Will there be any problems of the company receiving enough power to operate this plant on Guemes Island?
We have a power contract from Bonneville Power Administration, which is typical of the contracts given to the aluminum industry, and we have what is termed firm or not interruptible power in an adequate amount to take care of the operation of this plant. We also have the right sometime in the future, when Bonneville completes its program of expanding water storage and so forth, to amend our contract for additional power so that the plant can be expanded. At this time, it would not be possible to build a larger plant on firm power. It would be possible to build a larger plant using the firm power we have, which is 240,000 kilowatts, plus a percentage of interruptible power. And frankly, most of the companies in the area do use a mixture of firm and interruptible power. There is adequate power under contract for this facility.
Who are the owners of Northwest Aluminum? How is it structured?
Well, as I said at the beginning, Basically, Bell Intercontinental owns 100% of the stock of Northwest Aluminum. Bell, to give you a little background, has a net worth of something like $55 million. In turn, slightly over 50% of its stock is owned by the Equity Corporation, which is controlled by American Export Esperanza Lines. The combined net worths of the family is of the order of $250 million. The Bell Intercontinental, Equity, and American Export Esperanza, of course, are all public companies. We're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Equity is listed on the American Exchange. American Export is on the New York, the big board. So that everything we do, including all our operating figures, our financials and whatnot, are a matter of public record, and we'd be very happy to provide annual reports, balance sheets, and so on and so forth of the family. And there is also a complete disclosure of the relationships of the families of companies that exist.
Dr. Meisner McDonald again from Channel 4 in Seattle. Following on to your power and your ownership answers, there's a report that another aluminum company wanted to build a plant at Ferndale, but that Northwest got the power commitment from BPA, and that those two operations have since merged and will build 4, not 2 pot lines on Guemes. Is that correct?
It's the first I've heard about it.
Dr. Meisner, Reynolds ran into some pretty big lawsuits in Oregon over the emission of fluoride. Do you anticipate that your operation here might face the same fate?
We do not, because of the system that we propose to use to prevent the emission of fluorides in any significant quantities.
Dr. Meisner, you mentioned bringing the alumina off the barges or cargo ships on a conveyor belt. Is this an enclosed system? I've
Yes.
seen alumina,
Yes.
and I know how light and volatile it is.
It is a closed
It is
system.
a closed system?
Of necessity, it must be. That's right. It has to be. We'd never get it up to the storage tank otherwise. That's right.
Dr. Meisner, you mentioned that there will be some improvement of transportation facilities to the island. Presently, we have a small county ferry running to the island. Do you anticipate a privately owned company ferry or some state aid in a ferry system, or what, to provide your transportation for employees and other equipment?
We do not anticipate a private transportation facility. We assume that either the state or the county will adjust the ferry service to accommodate the number of people, the traffic that will generate. Historically, this is the function of state governments and county governments.
Adjust the rate of service, do you mean put on additional vessels or run this small boat for that much more?
I really don't know. I can't answer that question. The answer to that question is that the engineers looked at a great many sites. I honestly don't know whether they're all in Skagit County or not, although I know that I looked at 5 myself after they had narrowed them down, and we didn't just zero in on a residential island. I don't know where that is, frankly. I can't answer that question because I don't know the location that you're talking about.
Could you put Mr. Strike at the podium so we could ask him?
Surely.
Please.
You know what Shannon is? Would you repeat
would
the
you
question?
spell-
What's the...
Mr. Trecker from Channel 12 again. Was Ship Harbor Shannon Point industrial site pointed out to you?
Well, where is Ship Harbor?
It's right out near the State Ferry docks.
Well, I don't think by that name it was. We saw one by the State Ferry dock, yes, and we saw the one over by your airport, and I guess we saw 10 or 12 in the area. but I don't recognize it by that name,
That
really.
name is
Is
not
that the
familiar.
site listed by the Bonneville Power Administration in its catalog of industrial sites?
No.
May I answer this question, and yours too, in a sense? I think if you'll check the Bonneville Power Administration's policy, you'll find that there, and I think properly and appropriately, their policy is to provide power where industry determines it is most economic for industry to locate, and not to try to direct industry into a particular county, community, or state. They would be subject to all sorts of pressures and criticisms if they did attempt to use their ability to provide power to favor one area as distinct from another. Now, I have never seen this survey that you mentioned. Bonneville, if it has a survey, as apparently it has, we're very careful not to attempt to influence us in any way. This is a policy that they've gone so far to encourage that they have the so-called postage stamp rate.
Whatever your way to avoid communicating with them, talking about such things as maybe you'll have a ferry. Isn't it time you told these people something definite? This is where they live. You're going to take away approximately a fifth of their items. You're going to definitely destroy what has now become known as their way of life. You're going to change everything for them. Isn't it time that you told these people where they stand?
Mr. Woodgate, I think that from now on, yes, there can be and will be and should be communications with the peoples of the island and Anacortes. I don't think there's any question about it. As plans materialize, I believe from now on they will be immediately informed. But I think you also understand, I'm sure all of you do, that when you're deciding on a plant location, you do not go around publicizing it. There are too many reasons and logical reasons that you just do not do that. There are too many things that can get started in the newspapers that are erroneous. Probably some of them have happened up here.
Could I follow that question up and say what you intend to do to break down this unfriendly attitude that now exists?
I don't think we'll have to break it down. There are two or three things. One, I think you're wrong in the statistics you've quoted. We understand that over half of the residents of the island have signed a petition that they would like to have us there. I don't know what the count is or anything about it, other than I have been informed that over half have signed such a petition. Whether that is true or whether it's now 3/4, I don't know. But I do know this, that once they become informed that we are going to be a responsible citizen of the island and Anacortes, that they'll be very happy. I don't see any deterioration of their way of life at all, if anything, an enhancement of it. Yes, sir.
Dwayne Trecker of Channel 12, sir. Weren't you warned ahead of time that this might be like stepping on a hornet's nest to step out onto an island?
I never was. I don't know. The only thing that I was somewhat apprehensive about was that an island just doesn't sound like a place for industry. And we were somewhat concerned about what the financial institutes might think of it, but they, after seeing the engineering studies, are very happy too, as we think the residents will be happy.